Hey everyone. So I've never having done this before, so I'm going to have to wait and see how this works and see people scrolling in. There may be no one showing up. It could be very short. Otherwise, it might be an hour, hour and a half, depending on how many people may tune in for it. So, oh, no. All right. Some punctual people. So I'm just going to look on my phone just to see how this is going. I've never done one of these before. All right. Cool. Okay, it looks like a couple people are watching. Excellent. So just to give you a bit of background about why I'm doing this, obviously we're all going a little crazy right now. Hi, Nick. We're all going a little crazy right now, I think, with the social distancing that's going on. So I thought this would be a nice distraction for people that need something to occupy their time, including me. Also, the BESM 4th edition PDFs just got released on drive-through yesterday, and so it seemed to be a pretty good time to do something like this. I've been working on BESM extras and a couple other projects, BESM happening, so it seemed, yeah, let's get this done. I've never done one of these before. I've never done an Ask Me Anything before, so this is kind of new to me. I've seen other people do it, but not myself. So if you have any questions, type away, I guess. Yeah, and I'll do the best that I can to answer the questions that come up. If there's no questions or when there's a bit of a lull, I'll just talk a little bit about what's going on. So obviously with the BESM books right now, so there was the Kickstarter and the Pledge Manager, and they were fulfilled. And so everyone has been sent out the PDFs of those products. The other books, they're actually at the press right now in China, but everything kind of got thrown up in the air a little bit with the timing of what was going on. There was New Year's, Chinese New Year's caused some delays. There were some approvals that caused some delays before that. And then once we were actually through the Chinese New Year, that's when the COVID-19 hit. And so caused even more problems. So we're a little unsure exactly when it's going to be available. Best estimations right now, and it is just an estimation, probably May. If everything goes well, because they're at the printer now, everything goes well, they should be able to get them shipped off end of April. We're hoping, fingers crossed, and then get them in May. But there could be delays. Obviously, we are at the mercy of that. So, I see Milo and Kenna. Thanks very much for joining in from your different places. So, the hope is that we wanted to get them done, late last year, maybe December, maybe early this year. It's now looking like the May-June timeline, and so a little bit later, but the wait will be worth it. If you've seen the PDFs, if you've downloaded those, then you'll see kind of what we did. It's a fairly substantial, large product launch with a lot of different products that go along with it, whether it's the free Dramatis Personae, the 4 volumes that came with stretch goals, or whether it's the core book plus the naked, plus the game screen, an adventure, and the character folio, and the dice. Speaking of which, the one thing that is finished is the dice, which is pretty awesome. So I do have these. This is the actual kind of final product of the dice that we have. It's was produced at a different factory that we had, and we did this a little bit earlier, obviously much simpler to produce. And so that is being shipped over to our printer that's doing our books, and it'll be held there, and then we'll ship everything at once. There's no sense in just shipping the dice over from China. So yeah, really, really happy with how the dice goes. So I see Milo, you had you had a question. So anime license, oh yes. So there's the dream list of what I would love to license. Whether or not they're economically viable would be a different thing. And then there's things that we're looking for actually licensing. So for obvious reasons, if we're actually looking at licensing something, really can't talk about it too much. Both for negotiation reasons, secrecy reasons. There's a few more modern shows that would be great licenses. I'm sure people could ring off their favorite shows. If you look at the top 10 or top 20 shows, obviously some of those we're interested in. If you're looking at, what I would love to see as a license, obviously Sailor Moon. We do have the board game license for that. I would love to do another Sailor Moon game that we did in 1998. Well, that was my first licensed product that I did, and I would love to redo that one. There's some issues with licensing on Sailor Moon with approval process and whatnot. It makes some things a little bit difficult, but that would be a great license. Obviously, anyone that knows the history of BESM knows that Ranma 1/2. Love to do that. Not of economically viable license, I'm sure, but wow, I'd love to do that one. But in terms of what we're looking at doing, yeah, unfortunately, I can't really talk to a lot about those, but there's some ones that if we can land some of the ones we're looking at, it would be pretty impressive. I think it'd be great for BESM. And again, you got to consider that what's good for a BESM license and good for a company of our size might not be something that like a Wizards of the Coast or Paizo or something of much larger company would be good for them. So some companies may need the mega licenses, but we can have something that's just good, solid for BESM itself. So while I do believe that BESM can fit most types of shows, and it is the multi-genre universal RPG, and it can handle most at the same time, I think there's some that suit better than others for it. So, for example, something that had multiple different power levels, perhaps guilds or factions or something that characters can easily slot themselves into. Certainly, powers are useful. That's not to say you couldn't do a Heroes Greenwood license where everyone is just normal humans. You could do that, and certainly BESM could run that, but I don't think that's where the biggest strength are for a license. So yeah, so that's pretty well what we're looking at. I'm sorry I can't say more. I just don't want to kind of jinx anything and reveal anything that isn't appropriate at this time, but we are working on some things. So William asked, what's on deck? Yeah, thanks for the background. It's something I do for some filming on, and just kind of it's difficult when you're working in a home office, and my home office here is in my loft. Obviously I have bookshelves and computers, and you notice I'm touching my face a lot. I'm very itchy, but it's okay. Wash my hands. I'm not touching anybody else. So you're not supposed to touch your face with Corona, but I can do it when it's just myself. So the what's on deck? So the next big thing that I'm working on has been BESM Extras. So this is some of the rules that were in, say, 3rd edition, 2nd edition, maybe even Silver Age Sentinels. Some of the more crunchier rules or maybe expanded game mechanics. So they were pulled out of BESM to make BESM a streamline, really an essential core RPG, which is what we had when we did BESM. And then from there, we also added a bunch of new stuff that we hadn't seen before, either expansions or new additions. So for example, we talk about Diceless BESM, which is kind of neat. We also go into power packs. So these there used to be in 3rd edition, we kind of addressed them as kind of like magical templates. So you can have like a shaman or a wizard. And these are kind of a collection of either enhancements, mostly limiters, that you can add on. So if you have say a traditional D&D mage that requires a spell book, maybe verbal components, somatic components, and if you had these things that your character always requires these kind of disadvantages, these limiters whenever you do something, rather than list them all individually, now you can just say, so I'm at the wizard power pack, or I have the shaman power pack. And so that streamlines stuff quite well. We also have bundles. So these are what people would traditionally think of as spells, but we call them bundles because, well, spells implies magic, and this isn't necessarily magic. Could be technology, psionics, could be straight up magic, certainly. But these are kind of pre-made, pre-packaged things. So if you think of maybe in the Slayers, Lena Inverse, her dragon slave. So here's the spell dragon slave. So we package that up and provide that as, not that we're doing dragon slave, but we package it up as a bundle, we're calling them. So bundles are things, think of in your spell book, your pre-made package of powers. And so we have that in BESM Extras. There's a lot. We have over 70 different items and weapons that we are including there as well, all statted out, all the way from galactic battle cruisers and AI space stations down to a life raft. And we also have things that everyday types of items. We also have some magical ideas. So you got the kind of the standard fantasy writing quill. So I take a quill, I write something on a piece of paper, and halfway across the world, it shows up on their paper that my allies have. And so these are pens that you can write. And so we've statted out a bunch of different things, try to hit different genres, different power levels, to give you an idea of of what BESM can do. So anyway, so that's the big thing that we're working on is BESM extras, but that's not it. So we're going to be taking the Dramatis Personae 1 to 4, compiling those into a single hardcover volume. We're doing that. We're also working on something we just announced in our newsletter a couple days ago, yesterday, I guess it was, the something called 2D Animinies, which are cardboard standee miniatures. So rather than trying to do a miniatures line at this point, where BESM isn't a tactical game, it's not a skirmish level game. It doesn't have those types of aspects built into the system, but it's sometimes useful just to have representations when you're role playing a map on a board, for example, something you maybe just draw out, or even just random. Like often when I'm playing on a table, even if we don't have minis and a map, you might want to just say, okay, representationally it's here, and here you guys are hiding behind this book, which is a rock. So it allows you to have minis that we have, and we have some great art for the game, and a lot of individual standalone character art as well as monsters and whatnot. So we packaged over 100 of these, put them on different sizes. So obviously something that is a character is going to be different than the Archfiend, who's mammoth sized, I believe. And so his mini, his cardboard mini, is going to be much larger. And so that we're working on that, and that's going to be coming out as well. So kind of mid to late year, obviously not mid for producing, but mid for kind of putting it out there, whether it's a Kickstarter, whether it's a pre-order system. We haven't decided that yet. But that's what we're going to be doing, which will be coming out later in the year. And then if you read the BESM book, you'll see some of the other titles we have that we're going to be working on, the BESM multiverse. So think of this as the guide to the multiverse with the 7 different worlds. It's all covers all the many different genres, which is kind of nice. So we're going to have that book. We're going to have the LARP book. A couple of the things we haven't announced yet, but so that's, is what we're kind of working on right now. So Nick, I see you're in for Edmonton. Thank you. And Charles, you just joined in. So that's kind of what's going on right now. So I hope that gives you talk a little bit and gives you a little bit of a comprehensive view of what we're going to be doing. That's not all we're doing is BESM, but that's primarily what I'm focused on right now. Raphael, see that My Hero Academia, Fairy Tale, great licenses, obviously, and so do you have any future BESM projects, like another D20 edition? Oh, yeah. So we have been doing some research on 5e products. BESM D20 was interesting because it sold fairly well. And whenever I ran some polls about what is your favorite edition, it was kind of equal to third. It polled very well, but it didn't get the traction. It didn't get the headspace or the space within the gaming industry that kind of matched up with its sales and its approach. So I think that's because there was just so much, obviously, D20 stuff early on, and maybe the BESM D20 fans aren't as vocal as the TriStat fans at that point. So we're certainly looking at our options for a 5e BESM. Of course, given that we just did 4th edition, I can't call it BESM 5e because that implies something else. So we're exploring our options for that. The license is not the same as it used to be, but we think that the approach of the anime D20, which is what the SRD, what we called it, we think that our approach of doing a point-based version of Dungeons & Dragons. So unlike other games like Mutant Masterminds, for example, is a great game that took the core of D&D and then used the D20 style system to create their own game. That's not what we did with BESM D20. My goal was to create a point-based version of D20. So deconstructed everything down, reconstructed it, and then added in a lot of things that came from BESM. So that's something that we certainly might be doing with that. So some people, obviously, Raphael, see that you like the BESM extras, which is great. We get some really, it's going to be a great additional book. And so the question always comes up, why wasn't this included in the core book? And a couple of reasons of that. One, whenever we were going to do BESM, it was a huge risk because BESM has been out of print for almost 15 years. So I didn't know if there's going to be a market for it whenever we decided to take it on, get the license from White Wolf. So a bit of a risk, but also I thought BESM's elegance is stronger when it's streamlined. So if you could have rule A, B, C, D to handle, like I say, grappling or cover rules when you're fighting and all these other aspects, more tactical, more crunchy. And I think there's some people that absolutely like that, but that's not where BESM's strength lies at its core. And I wanted to give the BESM relaunch the widest core audience at its base mechanics. If you go back to first edition and then later to second edition, you'll see that it was much more streamlined. It's got more complex as it went on. We added in Silver Age Sentinels and Tristat DX. Obviously, it got bigger, and some people, it was exactly what they wanted. And I think the totality of it is wonderful. I think all of that is great. But I think as the core, it's better to have it more simplistic. It also allowed us to not worry about page count so much. So already 352 pages for BESM 4th edition. If we had added in all of the things we're doing for extras, it would have been way too large, and I would have had a $80 RPG. We didn't want to do that. So this way, if people want the complexity, we have it on there. Think of it almost like your Unearthed Arcana, as someone had mentioned before. It's a core optional rule book. It's core in the sense of it's not one of those 2 or 3 deep rule books with these obscure rules. Dungeons and Dragons, obviously tons of those where you have a book and then another book and another book. It's not one of those things. It is what I call almost like the holy triumvirate of it. You're going to have your core book, you're going to have your naked, and you're going to have your extras. Those 3 books, to me, make up what BESM, the core line will be. But not everyone might want extras, and that's certainly fine. You can play BESM exactly the way it is, exactly the way I envisioned the core of BESM. But you can add in extras if you want to. Yeah, HR, thanks for asking about my wife. Just provide some context. I did announce it, and it's not a secret. So my wife late last year was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. So obviously, really shitty what happened there. So tests, treatment, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of changes in the family, obviously, about how we're dealing with that. And so it is the advantage of the jobs that I have with working with Discami, as well as many of you might know, I'm a city councilor here in Guelph. So the flexibility that I have during the day has been really beneficial to helping my wife with her battle. And it's a struggle to remain positive every day. Obviously, it's stage 4 cancer is it's metastasized in her bone. It's really drastic. So yesterday she had a surgery that will help cut down some of the feeding of the cancer, and then later on there'll be some drugs, and there's always tests and more tests to see how things are doing. So it's a tough time, but it is what it is. I mean, this is something. We just have to continue working. I have to continue working in my jobs. We're down to 1 income now with the family. My wife was a nurse, which is particularly hard for her, especially now with the COVID-19. She would really like to be able to do more helping, but she has to be concerned about herself right now. So thanks very much for asking, HR. In the end, things are what they are. Better days, worse days. Right now, things are decent. She's resting because of the surgery yesterday, and she's in a fair amount of pain, but that's to be expected from a surgery. And then we're hoping to get a quick recovery. People in the community have been really helpful with bringing groceries. Obviously, with the social distancing, it's a little difficult to get out. I just got back from the Gamma Expo in Las Vegas, Reno, and so I'm supposed to be a little more isolated as well. So even just getting out to do a grocery run is a little more difficult now. And so community help has been great, and it's really allows me to do some focusing here at the house on the work for Discami as well. So that's been pretty good. So Nick, you asked about, and I see I'm just catching up on here. So you asked about a monster manual. So challenge rating. So that's actually in extras. We don't call it challenge rating. We call it threat rank. I forget, threat something. And it's how do you create a character? So if you're going to have a major vampire villain, how many character points should they be compared to the number of people in your group and the points that they have? And so we do have that. We're not a straight up monster manual we're going to be doing. Instead, I'd rather do characters and NPC through examples that come from the different genres. So in the multiverse, for example, there will be a lot of different races from the different areas across the multiverse. And so they'll be in the multiverse book, for example. And then if things proceed well, I'd like to do a different genre world book for each one. So the multiverse presents the totality of the multiverse and goes into each of the worlds. But then I think we could do, for example, Imago. We could do a separate Imago book, which is going to be very focused on that type of setting, or Aradia with the natural magic setting. So they represent genres, but they're also worlds, and I think that's where BESM really thrives the best. If you look at some of the second edition books that we had, that they kind of doubled as a genre book as well as a setting book itself. Something like Centauri Knights, I think, was a great example of that. Raphael, talk about BESM LARP. Yeah, so it's still early in the process of that. We have to do some play testing of it, but I think given the number of conventions that use LARPing and anime LARPing in particular, and a lot of them have their own system, there's no reason why BESM can't dominate in that field by having a unified system. So when you're East Coast or West Coast, going to different conventions, why not have a system that can handle every genre, is simple, streamlined. So we'll see. I mean, even if it's not adopted everywhere in every convention, that's fine. I think we can do a LARP system. What I want is something that is still BESM, but just in LARP form. It's not a lot of changes that need to be made. Obviously, something on task resolution needs to be different. I'm not going to do the rock, paper, scissors, for example. But we're going to be addressing that in some way. So that one, very preliminary. So just scrolling through quickly, because I've been, losing a little bit about it. So plan for anime source books, yes, Donnie, but we don't have anything to announce at this point. Tommy talking about to get BESM from White Wolf and returning it home. We'll see. I'm happy with our relationship with White Wolf. They're very quick now. And initially there was some rocky stuff, but we have a much better relationship now. We get really quick turnarounds on approvals. They're a good licensing partner. That said, sure, I'd love to have full control over BESM. Maybe that's in the card sometime. Maybe it's not. We'll see. We're working on some stuff. And thank you for all the warm wishes. I really appreciate that. Oh yes, so the threat system is a lot less convoluted. There's some real interesting mechanics that we have that actually carry through three? Yeah, so there's mass combat, there's threat ratings, and there is, why am I blanking? So I'm just going to quickly switch over to the book that I have, which is, I'm just looking through the PDF. So if you see, I'm like, oh, what is he looking at? Just trying to, there was one more thing that we actually had kind of one system or one approach to stuff, which was really, really good for what we're doing. And this is, I'm not going to be able to find it. So, but I do remember mass combat and, oh yeah, social combat, of course. That's what it was. Mass combat, social combat, and threat ratings. We have one system that kind of handles all three. That's not to say that we're trying to shoehorn everything in. It's just when we're looking at doing that particular way of addressing things, what you're doing is you're taking a baseline. You're saying, okay, do a comparison between A and B, whether it's Army A and Army B, or in a social combat situation, you meet someone at a bar and you're trying to one-up someone. So you look at the baselines of, here's a bunch of different categories, say 10 different categories. Who has the advantage in these categories? And depending on who has the advantage, they'll get either an edge, for example, a minor edge or a major edge. And then at the end, when you look at all the categories and add them all up, you're going to say, oh, okay, well, the net, this one person is going to have a major edge, or this army is going to have a major edge based on the number of people they have, the skills that they have, the train advantages, the commanders that they have. And so when you start rolling dice, then you're going to apply your edges or your obstacles, which, as you know, is the 3 or 4 dice, and you take the top 2. You always take the top 2. And it's a really simple, elegant way to represent what we're trying to do. We can handle entire mass combat, but just think of Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings movies, that giant battle. We can resolve that with one single roll. Now, maybe people want multiple rolls, and you can certainly do it that way as well. But we are doing our approach to mass combat and social combat and to kind of establishing threats. We are kind of approaching it through a BESM lens, not through what other games have been doing. So yes, it's not going to be convoluted. It's fairly straightforward once you get into it. Sean, you want to see some expanded rules around mechs and starships. So there's not really a lot of rules that need to be done for mechs and starships. For example, we have your speeds, we have your defenses, we have your attacks. So we're not a tactical game. So there's not going to be tactical rules initially. Maybe someday there'll be a tactical aspect of a board game or a tactical rules. But everything that we need is in the core. And then we expand on some things and extras. We do provide more examples, but there's not really, we're not going to get into the high level of more battle tech, for example, level of combat. That's not what BESM is about. BESM is more abstracted. And while we go into more details in BESM extras, we're not going overboard with it. So yes, there's terrain and cover rules. There are called shots. There's going for weak points. So there's also how do you handle shields, for example. So there are some things that we're doing with it, but it's not going to get in the full on tactical level. That's not where we are currently. Yeah, play testing of the LARP. Yeah, that's going to be fun. The hope was to do a few more things this con season. There may not be a summer con season this year, so we'll see how that works. Okay, so Raphael, so mass combat rules. Yeah, so it's straightforward. Well, I can't really say it any more clearly than I think it's the BESM approach to match combat. It's the BESM approach to social combat. So yes, right off the bat, you can in the core book, if I wanted to walk up to a bar and kind of socially best someone. We're sparring with my nemesis, in a social setting. Maybe it's at a ball or something. The core games can handle it. You can look at your skill groups and say, well, I have the social skill group, and so I'm going to roll and use my soul roll, for example, and that'll be compared against the opponent. So we have that in the core, but the social combat rules just allows you to take things up a little bit more and considers things like, well, do you have any allies nearby? Do you have privilege in society that your opponent does not, or vice versa? And what about secret information? If you have something that you can spring on someone at the last moment in a social sparring situation, that gives you an advantage as well. So yeah, it's going to be a great way to do this. Let's see. Oh, so I do have a few things here. I'm not going to show you what I have, but yeah. So in the glasses, they're always going to get me. Bar fight rules. Bar fight, quite frankly, it's just a regular fight, right? Like you can take the mass combat rules and you can say, well, mass combat can apply for a 4-on-4 battle. But I think most people do like when you're getting into like a small groups, like my adventuring group versus a bunch of orcs in a bar, for example. I think most people prefer to actually run those on like the regular combat rules rather than a more simplified mass combat, but you can certainly do that. Greatest challenge, Milo asks, what is your greatest challenge working with BESM again after so long? Part of it actually is there's so many different versions of Tristat and BESM in the past that often my mind reverts to the older ones. For example, we changed how insubstantiality works. There was insubstantial, and then it went to kind of a density type aspect. We did it through Silver Age Sentinels, which bled into BESM Third, and now we're going back to a different type of way of doing change state, which is an insubstantial because, really was it even changing your body into water, changing your body into steam or gas, or changing it into an ethereal type form. We thought that change state was a better way to do it. So the big thing is, sometimes I think back and I'm calling up the old rules in my head or old names. So we've done some name changing, partially to make it more universal. So thinking the divine relationship. It was called that in first edition, second edition. It was called that in Silver Age Sentinels, Tristat DX. Now it's no longer divine relationship. Now it's mulligan. Because really that's what it is. It has nothing to do with pairing up with a deity in any way. And I thought divine relationship maybe implied that a little bit too strongly. So changing it to mulligan is a much more straightforward way of doing it. And so just remembering these terms, every so often I'll be doing write-ups of character stats and whatnot, and I'll slip in the old terminology, unfortunately. So that's probably the biggest one. Most of it's just not challenges. It's just a dream. I love working on BESM. It is amazing. And I'm so thrilled, given how everything went down and how it disappeared, and we ended up selling it off, to be able to get back and play in that sandbox again that I created in 1997 is pretty special. And Raphael, liking the edges and obstacles. Yeah, thanks. I agree. It was, we always had modifiers. As soon as you think of something like, I'm going to do X, it's like, well, what if I had this little tweak to it? So I'm going to shoot someone, but I have a scope on my gun. Or someone's firing at me, but I'm going to hide behind a bush. That's in extras. Every time there's all these little tiny modifiers that can be added for stuff, and it got confusing as a +1, +2, -1, -2, yet alone the whole roll under, roll over aspect that I think we've solved. But edges and obstacles, and people have said, oh, it's just like the advantages and disadvantages in 5e. Yeah, it is actually. I have no qualms about saying that was a massive inspiration for it. That's not to say that they were the only ones to ever do that, but when I came across that, in my kind of pre-BESM time, before we were actually getting into doing that, and I thought it seemed so elegant. But a D20, you're limited. First of all, it was only ever one extra D20, so 2 D20s instead of one, and then you take the highest of the two. The reason why we always went with a 2 dice system, 2d6 and 2d10 and Silver Age Sentinels, I think bell curves are far better, the more representational of what kind of happens in real life, where things are curved, whether it's intelligence quotients and populations or trends in media or whatnot. So I like the bell curve aspect. And so suddenly when you have a 2d6, adding in a third or a fourth was a really powerful way to do it. And it allowed us to simplify things so much, so people no longer have to remember what the modifier was. It's like, oh, well, I'm doing a called shot on someone, but I have a rifle scope and I am shooting them from up high and they're behind cover. What are all my modifiers added on? And now it's much easier to say, well, that's an edge, that's an obstacle. You can decide if they're majors or minors, or you can look it up in the book, and then you just simply roll an extra die. I've never been a big fan of dice pool games. I've played some games like some of the original World of Darkness stuff where you're just rolling like massive amounts of dice. You can think they're fun, but I just find it actually not that much fun. I'm a big dice checker. So for me, rolling two-sided dice, two six-sided dice was great. Adding in a third and a fourth, and then taking the top ones, they don't make a huge difference. I mean, I'm certainly remember making D&D characters back in the 80s. You roll your 4d6 and you take your top 3. That was a very standard way of doing your ability scores. So edges and obstacles just seem to make so much sense, and is probably the biggest improvement, not most important change. I think that the rebalancing of the points in 4th edition and making sure, like when I did 3rd edition, wasn't really in the right headspace, and I think I made some pretty big mistakes on the large scale numbers on that, where I was getting up to like 1,000 points. Would have been great for Dragon Ball, but I think I made some mistakes in 3rd edition. So the biggest improvements, no doubt, the balancing, but in terms of the refinements that came through, edges and obstacles, number 1 on my list. I'm really happy with how that turned out. I also like the enhancements and limiters. That's, edges and obstacles, enhancements and limiters, probably about equal. We did something similar to that for the weapons or special attacks back in 2nd edition that David Pulver introduced. I might have done some before that, but it was really David, I think, that kind of pushed that forward, where what you're doing is you're adding or subtracting your levels rather than, so this has an effective level of 1 more because you've given a disadvantage, or if you have something that has auto fire and it's an advantage, it actually has an effective lower level. That worked really well for weapons, but just bringing it in for the entirety of all the attributes made a lot of sense. So the old PMVs, power modifier values, that came out in Silver Age Sentinels, that was necessary when we were doing a superhero game, because there are so many variations on a teleportation between different characters of superheroes, as an example, or flight. So we needed some way to modify, but having that system, which was a linear add on 1, 2 onto a cost per level of 5 per level is what the attribute costs, and then you add on a +1 or +2 to get these advantages or disadvantages. A little sloppy, and it took for a lot more bookkeeping. So now, super simple with enhancements and limiters. So yeah, you mentioned about the Nick about the social encounter sound like politics. Yeah, let's just say there's some inspiration on some of that. And when they're writing up the rules, I mean, thinking of what are the advantages you have in a social situation, and yeah, privilege is something that comes from it. As a white cis straight male, I'm going to have in a political situation, I'm going to have more privilege, and even in society, more privilege than someone else that doesn't have all those. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's not a judgment call. I'm just saying it exists. And so if you're in a social situation, I mean, you think of all the TV shows you watch, whether it's anime or even live action, the interaction between two people is greatly affected by their standing in society. If someone is rich, for example, their words carry different weight than someone who is experiencing poverty. And so in a social situation, that makes a difference. So the social combat rules, I thought I'm really happy with how they turned out. I think it's great. Social combat is sometimes one of those difficult things to do where you have a less mechanistic game. And I didn't want to just have, roll another skill roll. Like, oh, I have interrogation, and I have diplomacy, and I have, I don't know, subterfuge or whatever it is, and I'm just going to add on bonus. And then I make one roll, and then the other person is going to resist against that. I thought a much bigger way to look at what is the actual is going to happen if you're going to have a social combat situation with someone, if you're going to sit and spar with them, if you're going to try to embarrass them at a big gathering, if you're going to try to one up on your opponents. What are the things that really make a difference that'll give you those advantages and your disadvantages in those social interactions? And that's what we came up with. And it turns out that's the exact same thing that happens in mass combats. When you think of the advantages you get from certain leaders or special abilities, if you're having one army, and this certainly happens in anime all the time, one army of normal JSDF troopers against paranormal people, aliens, or monsters that have special abilities. Well, those special abilities are going to come into play, and they're going to have a huge advantage. And so it's a very similar situation. You're going to be comparing between the two opposing sides, whether it's social or it's going to be for mass, and then you're going to be adjusting based on what advantages or disadvantages they have. And that will give you your final modified edges or obstacle rolls. So yeah, pretty stoked at how that turned out. Kenneth asked my favorite part about creating BESM. That's actually a really, really good question. I mean, I'm a tactical kind of guy, analytical. I like getting into the details about that type of stuff. So I certainly enjoy maybe the mathematical or technical approach to it. But what I really liked most about it, and going back to the 1996, when I first created the first BESM, was seeing how rules that I can come up with can facilitate a role-playing game where people are having a lot of fun, but the rules aren't getting in the way. So, I mean, I've played lots of different role-playing games, not as many as some. I maybe focused on a few that I liked. I played D&D for a lot of years. And then Amber, I was a huge Amber fan. What I really liked about Amber was the rules didn't get in the way. You kind of ignored them. And D&D, while I had a lot of fun playing it, inevitably you're pulling out a book to look up a rule on something. It doesn't matter how much you've played the game. I've played it for years, but I still have questions like, oh, what does this do? How does this spell work? And you're pulling it out and looking it up. Great for people that like that type of game. And obviously, there's a lot more D&D players than there are BESM players, so they're doing something right. But my favorite part about BESM was having this creation that gave people the framework of a game they can play and have some amazing social interactions, lots of fun. But the system got out of the way and allowed you to just have fun doing what you're doing. It's not to say you never look in the book. And some people really like rules, and they prefer maybe the game aspect more than the role playing. I'm the other way. To me, it's role playing is much more important than the game. Whenever I play my games, I don't pull out the rules very much at all. But I think that probably my favorite part. So thank you. That's a good question. HR, so Emporium. Yeah, it's not a question, but yeah, let me talk a little bit about the Emporium. So whenever we're looking at launching BESM, and obviously in the past we've had license agreements with different companies to either use BESM itself or maybe the TriStat system. We published a couple of those for other people. Sometimes we just license it out and other people publish it themselves. It was a good experiment back in the early 2000s. I enjoyed doing it, and I thought, well, that was a really great way to get more people into the system that we created. And so I wanted to do something similar like that with BESM, but I didn't want the complexities of me being the gatekeeper, as Dascami doing contracts and Dascami having approvals. And it kind of blew up in our face last time with Guardians of Order when things went bad at the end, and some people had licenses for using Tristat and weren't really sure what was going on. And so it wasn't the best situation, but making it through the drive-through with the Emporium, with the Storytellers Vault, the DMs Guild, that is a great way for us to do it. So opening it up to say, well, now anyone can create BESM material. And we're going to give you some of the layout templates. If you want to do it in InDesign or Word, we're going to give you the ability to reproduce a little bit of our text, but we're not going to be approving stuff. We're not going to be gatekeeping it. And you can slap on logos indicating it's compatible with what we're doing. The clincher is, it's only available on drive-through. So we don't want it. We don't want you printing your books. We don't want you selling on your own sites. So there is obviously a monetary component, and we funnel that funds. There's a portion that goes back to White Wolf, of course, as it is their system and their IP we're playing with. So the Emporium was just a great way for us to expand the fan base, because we, as a small company, we can't do every genre, every book, every idea. And HR is working on a really comprehensive weapons book that we would never do. We just don't have the person power to do something like that. So to have fans do it, and then people can get paid for their work, which is another great thing that I really like, that drive-through allows you to get paid. So you shove it up on a site, and whatever price you set on it, your choice, you get 50% of that for every sale you make. So this allows our fans to, in the past, maybe previously, people would make a character sheet that's super awesome, and then they put it on their website and people can download it. Well, this way, if it's an awesome character sheet and they want to charge $1 for it, or they want to write a book of NPCs or spells or whatever, and they want to put it up and they can get paid for it, excellent. So it's a really great way for us to be a bigger publisher than we actually are. So if we're only going to do, excluding the launch, 2, 3, 4 products a year, suddenly we can do 5, 6, 7, 10, 20, 30, 40 products a year if people really embrace it. And I think that level of selection is fantastic. So yeah, we're super excited about Emporium. We're aiming for beginning of June launch. We have kind of put the word out to our Kickstarter and Pledge Manager backers that they get first crack at the toolkit. And so we've sent that out to a few people that have asked for it. We're hoping that we can launch in June with a couple of people on board. And so kind of launch at once and have a small handful of products to go, and then from there anyone can jump on board with it, and we'll make all that toolkit available, publicly available. So if you're interested, if you've backed us on crowdfunding and you are interested in maybe putting something together, whether it's a small book with a page or two, an adventure, ideas or whatnot, or HR is doing this gigantic weapons book that's going to be over 100 pages, obviously that's not going to be the norm of what most people are doing. So if you're interested in any of that, drop us a line, info@dascami.ca, let us know and we'll send you the toolkit. So Sean, you're asking about more information about the rules around drive-through store. Oh, okay. So limitations. So pretty straightforward. Right now, to start, it's only BESM 4th edition products. So nothing, I have a spells for 2nd edition I want to release. Can't do it underneath the Emporium. It's only 4th edition we're supporting. At some point in the future, we may expand it out to other versions of the Tristat. Obviously, we plan to do Silver Age Sentinels 2nd edition, and that would also be included. We'd like to include that there as well. But right now, the main thing is produce decent material ahead and do it for 4th edition. You can lay it out how you want. You can do art how you want. You can do it about anything you want. And, as long as it's not, patently, like outright, outrageously offensive stuff. I know some people have community content guidelines and some of the other community games on there. I'm a little more flexible. Like I'm not, sex doesn't bother me. Violence doesn't bother me. I think, if you're an adult, you can handle that stuff. But we don't want to get into something that's like neo-Nazi level, like really super offensive, nothing like that. But other than that, very, very few rules. So we have the guidelines already ready to go, and if anyone wants them, we can send that out to them if they're looking at creating product. But it's really quite simple. You can do again, not every community content program allows this, but you can do music, books, comics, art, whatever you want. Like we don't care. You do what you want. It's your time that you're going to be spending creating a product. But you can't copy other people's stuff. You can't do, oh, well, here's 4th edition, and I'm just going to relay it out and use all of Mark's text, Descami's text that they did for it. No, you can't do that. We have limitations on how much of our text you can use. The goal is for you to create, not copy. And so certainly if anyone else has material, if someone else came and published something in the Emporium, you can't use any of their stuff. But other than that, very, very simple rules. Yeah, Raphael, nerf the mulligan and make it less great. Certainly I've seen the discussion online about mulligan's too powerful. Oh, it is not. 1 character point, what that gets you in the game now is huge. Mulligan is a nice little thing. It just gives people a way to do some dice rerolls once in a while. Excellent. But dice rerolls are not about the story. If anything, it's just a support to what you're doing and kind of represents someone's luck that they have. But 1 character point, I can come up with far more powerful ways to spend 1 character point in BESM than put it on a single dice reroll on a set. Mulligan is underpowered either or overpowered. It's neither. It is appropriately priced, I think, for this system. And if people, want to take it at level 6 and for 6 character points, they can reroll tons of times. Hey, more power to you. It's not about success. Your character's abilities to succeed at tasks does not mean the adventure is going to be better for you. Success and winning have nothing to do with enjoyment of the game. I have found whenever I've been role playing, the most enjoyable times I've had is actually when I fail at stuff. My characters come up against obstacles and can't get through. And the enforcing the hurt is a really powerful role-playing tool. So I think Mulligan is good for what it is, and it does represent that kind of that luck-based, fortune-based. So if you look at some of the characters that have it and some of the templates, like the Azra, I think, has it. Maybe the Fairy. We put it where is appropriate, and I think it does represent those character type templates well, that they seem to be just a little more fortunate than other ones. But no, we're not going to change it. Mulligan is what it is. If you want to house rule it, go ahead. Thank you, Tommy, mentioning that BESM has been missed. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, big time. Just reading through. Oh, the difference between core and naked. Donnie, thank you. So 352 pages, 144 pages. So significant size difference. But this is not devoid of art with 5-point font. The font size is the same. The art content is about the same. What we've done is we've simplified some of the rules. So previously, a great example would be something like jumping. I may have 2 or 3 paragraphs underneath the jumping attribute that kind of describes some of the context of the jumping and kind of how it works and what it does and just gives you a little bit of flavor to it. Where I could have just said, you can jump really far. And then the level 1 to 6 indicates, do you jump 10 times as far as the average person or 100 times as far as the average person? Obviously, the level descriptors are kind of in some ways the most important thing. Textual descriptions of the attribute, they take up a lot of space and they provide that full package in the core book. But in the naked, we just give you the basics. So if you were to flip back to 1st edition, if you had that one, if back to Kickstarter, you'll have it. But if you go back to 1st edition, you look at kind of what the core was, it was really, really simple. We didn't go into a lot of details on stuff. So when we had something like, well, you have you're really strong, or you're super strong, or you're tremendously strong. Like, it was really vague in what its approach was. That's closer to what naked is, although it's, again, a little bit more concrete on the rules than it used to be. But we've stripped out a lot of the extraneous stuff. So all the core rules are there. And it was really important for us to make BESM naked and the core RPG 100% compatible. So if you are at a table and you create a character with naked, you can bring that character over to a 4th edition game and it would be 100% identical. There's not a single change that's done. You may be missing, it's like, oh, I didn't know that particular enhancement was an option. But it doesn't mean we've taken any real aspects away. And so we've stripped down a lot of the wording. We've taken out some of the fluff, and then the multiverse is gone. A lot of the GM and the player advice have been greatly eliminated. So the game system is fully intact and naked with a lot less wordy. The advice and suggestions and setting material, that's been greatly contracted down. So my vision of Naked, which originally started when I was going to do vanilla BESM, and BESM Naked was just a different version of vanilla BESM. That was vanilla BESM was the third edition, the one we had planned but never got around to doing before the company went under. My vision for Naked in many ways was the game master would be running a game and he'd had the full fourth edition book, and that's $60. We can't make it any cheaper than that. It was $60. But BESM Naked is $35 for the hardcover. And so it allowed players who maybe aren't as invested in a game master to still have a core book that has all the same information and all this important aspects without paying quite as much. And so this is something you could have more naked around the table. Well, more naked books around the table than fourth edition books, and you'd have the exact same play experience at a cheaper price. That was the vision we had for BESM Naked. So it's not missing anything critical. Yeah. All right. Yeah, lots of D6 and Shadowrun, absolutely. The third edition, yeah. So Nick, you talk about how you like the 1 point increase for the areas and targets and duration. That's the old power modifier values and PMV system. Yeah, they worked for what we wanted them to at the time, but it was not elegant, because adding on, say, area as 1 point onto an attribute that only costs 1 point per level versus adding an area onto dynamic powers or power flux or something really expensive. And again, that might be a 5 or 6 or 10 points per level power, but you're still increasing your area and only paying a point. We didn't have it. It didn't scale. So it didn't matter how powerful the attributes were or how weak they were. The modifiers are always the same. But by doing it in the enhancements and limiters, suddenly now when you add your area on, it's going to give a bigger benefit to a more expensive attribute, the one that's at 5 points per level, than it would at 1 point per level. And because of it changes your effective level by 1, it balances out from a point. So we think that the current system is a much better way to do that. Keith, I see you came in, maybe a little bit late. Yeah, licenses, unfortunately, we can't really talk about those. We're not really revealing what we're going for. There's some ones that, if we can land 1 or 2 of the ones that we're currently pursuing, they're not unrecognizable. Like some of the licenses we did under second edition, like Serial Experiments Lane, we had Nia under 7. We never actually got around to producing that. We did Parallel Duel. I mean, these aren't exactly mainstream licenses. They're interesting. We did Ghost Dog, which is an anime, but as a 1-player, 1 GM game. So we did some pretty obscure licenses. And then we had Slayers, Trigun, Hellsing. We had Evangelion. And then that kind of, we weren't allowed to put that book out, even though we had it. So certainly we're going for larger licenses now. The boutique license, with the exception of Ranma 1/2, if that fell into my lap, we're going to do it. But yeah, we're looking for something that's a little more financially viable now. Yeah, PMVs, they do roll off faster than enhancements. I mean, power modifier values, PMVs. It was a great way of doing it, and it fits very well with BESM, being an active PMVs. But enhancements and limiters, enhancements is a long term, but it was really, it's the right term. It fits what it is, that it is an enhancement to an attribute. So yeah, it's a little bit longer. All right. Oh, hey, Kelly. Nice for you to join in. All right. Torin would like to know, as your son, Kenneth, I'd like to know how you're doing overall with everything going on. Yeah, thanks. I addressed that a little bit earlier on recently. It's tough. It's really hard right now. A lot of my thoughts are with my family, obviously. Right now, specifically, kids are off for 3 weeks. There was a 1 week March break, and then Ontario schools are shut down for 2 more weeks. So kids at home for 3 weeks and social distancing. My wife just had surgery, and trying to navigate the healthcare system with cancer is really difficult. So a lot of my headspace is focused on them. That's not to say I'm spending 24/7 on everyone else. I do have to work as the single income earner now. I got to make sure I put my hours into getting the BESM books out and doing my council work, although council has been suspended for a while as well now, mainly doing stuff online because, again, the social distancing. So thank you. I'm doing as well as can be expected. It's tough, but It is what it is. I mean, when you're in a situation like this, your shoulders grow larger because they have to, and nothing is more important than my family, to make sure that everything's good with them. But it doesn't help if I kind of wallow in the problems. I have to kind of go outside that and focus on what needs to get done, and yeah, deal with the situations as they come up. But at the same time, it doesn't help focusing on all the negativity and the what ifs and the possibilities. So yeah, so that's gaming helps. Certainly, I play a lot of Pandemic with my wife, which is kind of funny given what's going on now. We've been training 10 years for this outbreak, but only on a board game, unfortunately. All right. Blah blah blah. Oh yeah, end up on YouTube, Tommy. Yeah. So I don't know, having never done this before, I know I'm going to get a video and I'm certainly going to post it on Facebook. If it's possible to put it on YouTube, I'll do so. If I can download it and do something with it, great. I mean, certainly, having never done one of these, the important was to go on Facebook Live, and I figured this is better than kind of doing things over text. But yeah, if it's successful, maybe I'll do more of them too. Raphael, will the BESM Extra have rules on you want to scale attributes higher than level 6? Yeah, so we do address that a little bit. We also address going higher with the enhancements. So, for example, your targets or your area or your duration. So we don't talk a lot about going beyond. We do definitely. There's godlike powers and high level abilities. But when you think about the characters, most of the levels 1 to 6 are fairly straightforward. If you can't figure out a pattern looking at 1 to 6 for 95% of the attributes, and then we haven't written them very clearly. So if something is going 10 meters, 30 meters, 100 meters, 300 meters, 1,000 meters, 3,000 meters, you know what level 7 is going to be. And so that was one of the reasons we set things up very linearly. Not every attribute works like that. And for example, something like connected, which used to be organizational ties, but connected, we described a full 10 levels because we're describing people who are just briefly connected to an organization, all the way up to the leaders of the known worlds. There's not going to be a really lot of room to go beyond 10 for something like that. Similar with the change state. So you go through your liquid state, your gaseous state, your energy state. Well, there's only so many states you can go. So some of them don't scale beyond the 6 or 10 very well, but armor is very straightforward. Armor, every level is 5 points of armor. So you can go level 80 if you want to. And, if you're have that much armor. And some of the examples that we're giving with the 70 different builds of items, we go beyond the limits on some of them. So, a battleship carrier with an orbital laser system, obviously the weapon aspect is going to go well beyond level 6 for some of these really big weapons, or some of your speeds, your abilities. And so, yeah, we do talk about it a little bit, but most of it is also fairly straightforward. Most adventures there's not a lot of people are going to be playing gods, I think, with BESM. It's not saying it can't be done. We specifically have superpower levels, and people may play like the Goku Dragon Ball type level, but that will be less common from all of our experience playing in the 75 to 150 points, a kind of that heroic adventurer, maybe a little mythical type range. That is going to be much more common, and the system accommodates that perfectly well as it is. But yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit about going beyond that. Yeah, so comparing Naked to the Player's Handbook and BESM Core to DMG, you could look at it that way. They do play really well together like that, but a lot of the material is exactly the same. Like all the character creation, the attributes are going to be the same. Certainly the additional information about player suggestions and GMing suggestions. Yeah, that's kind of GM material, and you can think of that as the Game Master's Guide from Dungeons and Dragons. But I would think it more of really what we set it up is BESM Naked is a stripped down version of the rules. Whenever we did originally second edition, we were one of the first ones to come out with kind of really stripped down versions of the rules that were small fonts, remove the art, focus on the text, basically take the core book and just make it cheap. So we actually, called it what it was. We called it the Stingy Gamer Editions. So you can buy the BESM D20 Stingy Gamer Edition. It was $10 as opposed to a $30 book, or the Silver Age Sentinel Stingy Gamer Edition. We took everything and just compacted it down, but it was the same game, the same book, but without the fluff, without the niceness. It was black and white, no art, small font. But we knew that some people wanted cheap. And so we met that with the Stingy Gamer Edition. Back whenever D20 was big, there are some people that redid the Player's Handbook, for example, and they did the pocket books. And then that was, I think Mongoose did them, pocket guide. So here's a regular version of the game, and now here's a pocket guide for it, which is kind of like what we did with the Stingy Gamer Edition. But it was something that I don't see pioneered it, but we were one of the earlier ones to do that. Naked is intended to throw back to that. It's also a throwback to people that really and I'm kind of one of them. First edition was BESM, was kind of the right BESM. I like rules light. Amber Diceless is my favorite game out there. So lighter, less complex, less verbose rules is, to me, more along my style. But I know not everyone is into my style. So we have the standard, and then we have the stripped down version in naked. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Keith, for your prayers and your kind words. And wow, it's great to hear, Torrin. Thank you for mentioning about that you love BESM. Thank you very much for that. So, William, great question. Why 1-3-10 instead of 1-5-10? It seems 1-5-10 seems to make sense. Everyone understands that. But from a progression point of view, you go 5 times, 2 times, 5 times, 2 times. And so it creates a staging between levels that is not balanced, almost like a step wise. We wanted something more linear. So by going 1-3-10, it's approximately 3 times each one. Now, it's not exactly 3 times 3 is 9, but 9 is pretty close to 10. So by going 1-3-10, this allowed us to have linear progression, not stepped progression. And that was the decision made back when Silver Age Sentinels, when we first came out with this. And I just really like it. Yeah, it's not as elegant. People think in 5s. But we have other ones that go in that have some variation and that do step a little bit more. So we might go with 25, like say 1, 25, 100. So, 5, 25, 100. So 5 to 25 is 5. And then 25 to 100 is 4. So it's a 5-4, 5-4, just because we can't get into a totally linear unless you go by 10. So once we get into the 10, 100, 1000, super easy. Canadian, big fan of the decimal system. But going the 5, 25, 100, and then again, 5, 25, 100. So doing that method was a pretty good way for us to do it. So that's why we did those. So Nick, you're asking, so low level fight a D3. Yeah. So you're looking at using effectively different sized dice. So we got away from it whenever we're doing 4th edition. So Silver Age Sentinels was our D10 game, and BESM was our D6. And then we did Tristat DX, which was the X being any size die. So the more powerful the campaign, the bigger size of die you used. And the reason why that was necessary is because we had a roll under system back then. And so you needed, if you wanted to have a chance of representing what a superhero was at a D10 system versus a lower level of BESM with D6, is because it was roll under, you needed to increase the die type so you could have more room to roll under. Well, whenever we switched to a roll over system, all of that changed. And now you can run any power levels with D6 because now it just expands up from there. So if you had, something like a level 10 Mind Shield, which gives you a 20 plus 20 bonus onto your roll if someone's trying to invade your mind because you're at level 10. So now when you roll 2d6, you're adding 20 onto it. And so when you're adding on, it became limitless. So you're suggesting that maybe using it like a D3. you could do that, but we don't need to do that anymore. Now you could give people obstacles or edges if you wanted to, or more likely, if you're fighting like a kobold versus the equivalent of a 10th level D&D wizard or something against a kobold. So you do the anime equivalent of that. You don't need to worry about using less than a D6 because the amount of advantages and power level that either the fighter or the wizard or whatnot, or even going with mecha, like a mecha versus a person, there's not a lot you're going to be able to do. That person rolling the D6s with their a little bit of modifiers versus the mecha rolling D6s, but they're going to have massive modifiers on it because of their size, because of their strength and whatnot, or their combat ability. And so you don't need to worry about it. D6s should be able to handle everything you want to do. Now, if you truly wanted to play, Galactus versus Galactus or Goku versus, I don't know, Superman. It's a famous pairing. Rolling dice isn't probably going to give you the most amount of enjoyment because that's not what those stories are about. But yeah, you could easily just do it all with 2d6. So the 2dx, whatever x is, that system is now gone and no longer needed. Yeah, Raphael, one of the reasons the meter around kilometers per hour, that actually came up, well, for simplicity reasons. So we knew when you're doing, first of all, we know the decimal system or the imperial system versus metric. Not everyone's going to work metric. Most people are Americans. They might not understand meters and kilometers, and not to say that you can't comprehend it. It's just you don't work in these all the time the way, well, the rest of the world does. But when we had the specific speed of how much is a round. So you might think of a round as 10-second rounds. That's a very common kind of role-playing way to doing it. But when we worked with the numbers, it made sense for our rounds to be about 3 seconds. And the reason why is 3 seconds allows your meters per round to equal your kilometers per hour. Like, it's just a great conversion for doing that. And so when you think about how long does it take you to do an action in a round, so you can, fire guns, swing some swords, run and engage with someone. 3, 4 or 5 seconds. It all seems to make sense. And then it just happens to work out that kilometers an hour round, meters per round works out the same. So yeah, super easy. It also allows you to do character type movement and vehicle type movement and put them on the same scale. So obviously we're not going to describe like characters moving in kilometers per hour, unless you're like super speedster. But most of the time, you're going to be, you think, how many meters can I move in a round? That's how you think. But vehicles aren't going to be in that way. They're going to be in kilometers per hour. But now, boom, suddenly we have a unified system. Very easy to do that. And that's kind of an example of how we want to, my philosophy on approaching game design is elegance and simplicity, not accuracy, not technically something like super realistic. That's not, I think, what makes a better RPG. What makes a better RPG is something that gives you the framework of what you need to do without being, like breaks the fourth wall and just makes it completely unbelievable because you just can't get behind what they're doing, but gives you the framework what you need and then gets out of the way so you can just role play. And so that's kind of the philosophy of everything that I do with the games. Right. So BESM 4 does not have critical failed, critical success. It doesn't, but it is in extras. There we talk about the criticals and how to do that. And in fact, there's multiple ways to do criticals. We don't just give one and say, well, if you make a critical, double damage. It's like, well, here's how the different ways you can do it. You can base it on the roll you actually rolled. So if I rolled a 12 and that was a hit, well, I may do extra damage based on that roll. Or maybe I want to do a separate roll. Think of it in your typical, again, D&D is like the kind of the standard you can always go to. So you roll your D20 to hit, you hit, then you roll your damage. So you can do the same thing in BESM if you want to. So you can, make a separate roll for damage, critical damage. You can also do it based on margin of success, something we addressed it in the past in previous games. We didn't really talk about margin of success in the core 4th edition. Well, we're bringing it back as a concept in BESM Extras that you can consider how much you made your roll by. So again, it's oppositional roll. If I beat you by 2 versus 10, well, maybe that will affect how much damage I do to you, for example. So we bring that into play as well. So yeah, critical rolls, critical fumbles, we do bring them in. There's so many little things in extras. It's all of those, oh, we really need if this game had this little thing. Well, we tried to include it in extras. But there are so many of those little things we did not want them in the core book because that wasn't going to produce a better game. It'll produce a more comprehensive game, but that to us isn't a better game. So instead, let's put them all in the extras and people can pick and choose what they want. And if they're not interested in any of it, then they don't have to get any of it. They don't have to get the book. But otherwise, it allows them to pick and choose. Another really important thing, and this came up all the time whenever we did books, is if something is printed, it becomes law. And we know that that is the approach that people take. And I didn't want to foster that by having things in the core game. Because if it's in the core book, it feels like that is the rule. As opposed to a rule, it becomes the rule. But if it's an expansion, if it's in an optional book, then suddenly it doesn't have that same level of authority. And I wanted to remove that level of authority. I wanted to de-emphasize and kind of say, hey, here's a bunch of things for you to consider, but none of them are the way to do it. These are just things you could do. These are options that you can bring into your game if you like more complexity on damage, if you want more ways of doing a particular thing that's different than the core game. Here's the options to do it, but not a requirement. And so that was one of the reasons we pulled into options. Oh, the tie goes the defender. Yeah. So thanks, HR. So in the past, we've always had the tie goes the defender. And somewhat this came from doing some board gaming, as well as looking at role playing a little bit more. I really think that the active player should be the one getting the advantages. Like if you're the one doing stuff, you're the one that going out there to take the initiative. In a situation where there's a tie, we wanted to give that person who's taking the initiative the advantage, which is why ties now go to the attacker because they're the ones doing the active action. It could go either way. If you wanted to have it go to the defender, you certainly can. But it was a philosophy decision of, let's give it to the people that are doing stuff. So and that if you think outside of role playing, often by taking initiative, those are whether you fail or not, but people take initiative, they can often come ahead by the fact that they're doing stuff and they're the ones being active. And so that's one of the things that we did for that. But a great question. Raphael, I saw the arrow about teasing about, damage triangles like Pokemon. Yeah. So not quite a triangle, but yes. So we've come up with 30 or 40 different, let's say, spheres of power. You can call them types, like Pokemon types. So water type, air type, earth type. And in Pokemon, it's the entire character is that type. So, Pikachu is an electric type. He doesn't have an electric attack. Like he is an electric type. We obviously don't have that in BESM. We don't have people that have types. But there are times when people will have powers that maybe interact, not necessarily just weapons, but powers that interact. And we wanted to bring in this interesting way of things that are more powerful than another. Great example, fire and water. So if a fire type Pokemon and a water type Pokemon interact, typically the water type Pokemon will have an advantage over the fire type because water typically looked at as being more powerful than fire. Not overall, but in opposition to each other. So we thought, well, what about if it was a situation where I have a teleportation ability that is fire-based? I'm a fire elementalist, for example. And someone else has a telekinesis that's water-based. So maybe like a waterbender from Avatar or something, like water surrounds the person. And we thought, well, you can have a situation where it's power versus power, not necessarily weapon versus weapon, power versus power. And they will have different sources because every time you do something, every power you have in the game, you should have some sort of source explanation of it. It's like, well, I do magic, or this is fire-based, or maybe it's all psionic-based or tech-based or whatnot. So we said, well, let's come up with a list of all of these different types of powers, whether it's death, math, technology, fire, psionics, even emotion, like some really weird kind of out there ones, as well as the standard elemental types. And let's say we're not going to come with a grid of, okay, that's this one. How does it work against all other 39 powers? That was way too much. But there's some that it's going to be more powerful than. So water is maybe slightly more powerful than something. I forget what it is. And then much more powerful than fire, which gives you your minor edge, major edge. And so for the description of the 40, 30 or 40, but I think it's 40 different types of power sources, we give something that it is slightly more powerful than, and then much more powerful than. And when it's interacting in a situation where you have someone's super strength versus someone's flight. So I'm trying to fly away, you grab me by my ankle and you try to prevent me from flying. Now, if I have flight level 6 and you have super strength level 1, we have rules in there. It's like, well, I'm just more powerful than you. Like, I'm so much more advanced. My flight is at level 6 is so much bigger. It doesn't really matter why you're grabbing me or how you're grabbing me with your super strength. I'm going to break away. But maybe we're each level 3 flight versus level 3 super strength. Who wins? Well, now we look at the source of, well, why do my super strength function? And why does your flight function? And maybe these edges and obstacles can come into play when you're doing a roll. So again, optional, but it was inspired by Pokemon. Certainly, that was a lot of fun, and it's been around for a while. And I thought, well, let's just take it to the character sourcing of their abilities. So that's one of the things that we're going to be doing in there. Blah, blah, blah. Damage types, yeah. Rock, paper, scissors. Yeah, you can always do that. Had a player asking about, does Raphael, holy versus unholy damage for clerics or paladins versus undead. So that could be, if you're doing damage on, say, a weapon, that's a straight up enhancement that you're going to be doing. So there's an enhancement for weapons called targeted, I believe. There's, I'd have to look it up. I don't have it off the top of my head. Let me see. So what you do is you'd look for the characters that want to have the those special types of weapons. So what would be an appropriate add-on to have? So targeted certainly works, and then probably one of the best ones. You could also add on like something that's specific to an enemy. So if they were not for the weapon, but the type, like think of the typical dwarf versus giants kind of thing. Well, dwarves are very, very good at fighting giants, and therefore they're going to have an enemy defense or enemy attack, which is an attribute, which is separate from a weapon, but this is just interaction when they fight all the time. So I think the targeted was what I was thinking of, and that would be something that would be a great addition to add on for holy or unholy versus a particular type of creature. And math damage sounds dangerous. Well, it can be. Math has its advantages, but it's, we give a lot of weird examples in there, and people will create their own, which is what we're certainly looking for. Raphael asks, if you have edges and obstacle affecting the same roll, do they cancel out? Once again, in BESM extras, I know I keep going back to extras has the answers, but it really does have all of these answers. Things that were not going to come maybe a lot in the base game, and I didn't want to bog down the base game with too much complexity. But yeah, so we talk about how do you deal with edges and obstacles and stacking. We have a couple of simple rules. So if I have an edge for doing one thing and an edge for doing another thing, well, 2 minor edges equals a major edge. Pretty straightforward. My major edge and your major obstacle, they would cancel. Major versus major, minor versus minor. And so we use these kind of base rules of you do your consolidation, you do your comparisons, and then you cancel out till you get a net. In the end, a lot of the rolls you're going to do is you're going to be one modifier. You're not going to have multiple modifiers, and you, especially if you're oppositional, you might not have, well, if I'm making a roll and I get a major edge and you're making a roll and you get a major edge, well, then why bother having that? Like in the end, if we both have one major edge and they just kind of cancel each other out, and they're just regular rolls. So we talk about the whole suite of here's how you address multiple edges and obstacles for you and your opponent. So yeah, we talk about that. So William asked about rights for Centauri Knight, Space Fantasy, and Dungeon. So White Wolf owns all of those. We have the license rights to do BESM type stuff. And so if we wanted to do a re-release of Centauri Knights or a sequel to Centauri Knights, for example, that is something that we have the rights to do that, provided they approve it. But the entire BESM line and the entire Silver Age Sentinels line is owned by White Wolf. That was part of the sale that Guardians of Order sold things off to them. The licensed products, they don't have any rights to, so Slayers and Trigun and all of the Ultimate Fan Guides for BESM, they did not transfer, nor did the Game of Thrones RPG, nor did some of the other Tri-Stat books because of the rights reverted back to the authors, like Ex Machina, Dreaming Cities, for example. So yeah, that's the current status. But all the BESM stuff, there might have been one or two D20 books, BESM D20 books that they don't have the rights to, but most of the stuff was transferred over. Will those get a BESM 4 update? Yeah, that's a good question. So maybe. Centauri Knights, David created an unbelievable world adventure setting for that. It is so good. Like really, really good. I think it was under, it didn't get the love that I think it deserved. And so we did a Tri-Stat version of Centauri Knights, and we did a D20 version of Centauri Knights. I would love to see do more of that. But again, being a smaller company, where previously Guardians of Order was 8 people at its peak. We're not there. We're doing mainly freelance, where we had 8 people on payroll. So we're at a slightly different scope. And the initial part of, like, I've already mapped out the next several years we want to do with BESM. So if we just look at what's been announced or what's been kind of anticipated with extras, multiverse, and LARP, and then there's the different genre rule books. There's 6 or 7 ones that we can do for that. Plus the little extra stuff like the 2D Animinies. And, we're going to do fiction. I don't know. We're going to do manga. I don't know. So there's other aspects of what we have kind of lined up. And then at some point, we're going to run out. There's the core, like this is the core BESM of what we wanted to do. There's, the adventure line, the Dramatis Personae line, for example. So NPCs, adventures. So we have that, but yeah, that will not go on forever. So at some point, if we continue with BESM, if the line is strong enough, then we will be looking at doing some more stuff. And whether that could be, think of Dungeons and Dragons or Forgotten Realms campaign setting. Well, that's, we have our campaign setting with the multiverse, but how much do we want to go in it? So something like Centauri Knights, which was an adventure / setting book. What if we play Centauri Knights in one of the prime worlds, or even as a secondary world? And we actually made that its own book. We could certainly do that. Something like BESM Dungeon, which was more of an adventure, but it gave a lot of fantasy creatures. And then there was, of course, the fantasy bestiary that we ended up doing. I would rather roll those into, certainly the bestiary, into the genre books or the multiverse book. But we may do a full-on dungeon at some point. I mean, that's certainly, we are doing adventures, but how many? Part of it will depend how well things sell. So we got our core games, and the way the industry works is you get your core levels of sales, and then anything that's kind of like your first tier expansion. So like extras, for example, will be here in terms of sales. So there's a core game, here's extras. But so you get the adventures or NPC books, and you're stepping down. I mean, there comes a point where you don't see my hands anymore because they've gone down too far. And if it's just not economically viable, to pay the writers, the artists, the layout, the printing, and if we can't make a decent amount of money on it, then it doesn't make sense to do that particular line. So partially it's going to depend on how well it does. The hope is also with the Tri-Stat Emporium that some of that slack will be picked up by the community. And then if the community really has some love on doing settings or particular types of in-depth stuff, whether it's a book on weapons or here's a campaign setting, yeah, we'd love to see them do that. So looking at some other things, so space fantasy. So originally we wanted to call it space opera, but we were threatened by another company that had a space opera book out there, so we call it the space fantasy. So that is really what Cathedral is in many ways, is the space fantasy. I've run cathedral games with kind of like a Firefly style, where everyone has, there's a ship and all the players are on a ship and they go around doing different contracts. Certainly it's not, Firefly comes to mind easily because I'm a big science fiction fan, but I mean, that type of thing is very anime like. Cowboy Bebop, certainly not that far from doing something like that. So yeah, space fantasy definitely plays out into that setting. We'd like to do some more on it. Does White Wolf plan on using TriStat as a cross-born platformer? No, no. So White Wolf is not doing any RPGs. They're got out of that. Anything they do is they license it out to Onyx Path, for example, or Modifius. So they'll license it to other companies to do, but they're not touching anything themselves. So White Wolf, which is kind of almost doesn't exist anymore. Paradox is their head company. They are an online company. And so anything with RPGs, they will license out, which is why they license the TriStat stuff back to us, because no one else is doing it. So yeah, are we ever going to do any kind of crossovers, anything else? I wouldn't say it's impossible. There was an interesting, whenever we did Silver Age Sentinels, we did a crossover adventure book with Hero Games, and so, which was when worlds collide, it was Reality Storm. And it was the hero system and the Silver Age Sentinel system and the characters, and then they got together and had to save the world after they fought, of course. That was a lot of fun, and you can always do conversions between different systems. So we may do something like that if it comes up, if there's the right opportunity to do it. But as of right now, no, we're probably going to be the only ones doing TriStat, unless someone does something through Emporium, of course. Milo asked about the Astel Virtual Tabletop. Yeah, so we've had several people ask about Roll20, online versions of or support for BESM, and we're not against doing something like that. It just hasn't been our focus. Our focus right now has been on getting the books out, producing the best RPG possible. But we would love to have something else out there for character generators or online support for the games. It just there's a headspace and an availability. So we're not against doing something like that. It just hasn't been our focus. We'll see where it goes. A lot of it also, again, depends on the buy-in. So smaller companies or with a smaller fan base are not going to be doing as many interesting things as larger ones. Now, we had a great Kickstarter with 1,700 backers on it. So there's certainly demand for BESM. I know that. But I don't know how large it's going to be to justify going to some of these other third parties to do something like that. So it's on the radar, but it is not a priority right now. Getting some of these core aspects out in 2020 has been our priorities. Licensing RPGs, interesting settings, but poor systems. We really haven't been, just because we have so much with our own setting to do. And so, no, we haven't really been looking at that. The flip side would be great if someone who had some company put out their setting, their system wasn't really that well received, but the setting was really cool. If they wanted to jump onto Emporium and use our TriStat system to redo their game and make it compatible with BESM, if that can help their game and it's a great system, then everyone wins or something like that. So we're certainly open to it, but at this point, it hasn't really been a strong consideration for us. Again, we have our map, we have our plan, and there's some room for flexibility and variation in there, but we kind of know what we need to get done. And we would need to get the BESM core books, which is not just like the main book, but the core line aspect. We really want to focus on getting those and doing those right. Raphael mentioned the BESM 4 on the Roll20. Yeah, I agree. It would be kind of neat. We'll see where it goes. I see Dan has joined. Lori's joined. Hi to you both. Thanks for coming in. So as things are kind of wrapping up, I see it's almost 8:30, and the conversation has died down a little bit. Raphael, do you have a question here about the Emporium drive-through? Pay what you want. Yeah, absolutely. You can pay zero. You can charge zero. You can charge whatever you want. You can pay what you want. Your choice. Whatever you want to do, totally up to you. Go ahead and do that. So I think what we'll do is we'll end it here. Thank you all, a dozen or so people that came in and out as the time went. It's been a lot of fun. I've never done this before. I certainly enjoyed it. If you have any feedback, send it to us either on the Facebook pages or the groups. Drop us an email, info@discovery.ca. If it's not something you think is necessary to do, then we don't have to do it again. But I think that this was a really good thing to do. Hopefully, it gave you something maybe to do during the social distancing time and just past a couple of hours. So we can get a little squirrely sometimes on what's going on. So it's really nice to have a bit of a variety on this. So yeah, thank you everyone who's turned in. Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun. Hope you learned something. Hope you picked something up, and I'll look at seeing you online. All right. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.